I think it's safe to say we've all played a lot of Metroidvanias by this point. The indie scene is absolutely swimming with them. Dead Cells, Hollow Knight, Cave Story, Guacamelee, just to name a few. But before Metroidvania became a codified genre of video games with its own tropes and design philosophies, there were two games that gave the genre its namesake: Castlevania, Symphony of the Night, and Super Metroid. These two fundamental games for which the genre is named for also happen to have something in common. They both appear on my gaming backlog. Consider this a part one of a two-part series exploring the beginnings of the Metroidvania genre and why it is that these two games are so highly revered. For this first video, let's look at Super Metroid, the first of the two titles to release, and examine the Prometheus of the Metroidvania genre, Super Metroid, and how it pioneered non-linear platforming. Super Metroid is the third game in the Metroid series. Released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo, the game follows up from 1986's Metroid for the NES and 1991's Metroid 2 for Game Boy. The original Metroid set itself apart from other games by being a non-linear adventure platformer. Exploration was a fundamental part of the adventure, and you had to eliminate bosses, discover new weapons, upgrade your armor, and find powerful abilities that permitted the player access to previously unreachable areas, even if it meant doing the unthinkable, moving left. Backtracking like this was a new concept in games in 1986. Samus Aran, the main character of the Metroid series, is a fearsome bounty hunter chosen to stop the space pirates from their plan of replicating the Metroids and take out Mother Brain, the biochemical lifeform controlling the space pirates' fortress. Samus does indeed succeed in taking out the creature, but once she achieves victory, a timer starts counting down, signaling a bomb that will destroy the facility. The game had multiple endings, depending on the speed that the player managed to complete the game. Samus manages to escape, and if the player finishes the game fast enough, they are treated to a surprise: the reveal that Samus is a woman. The original Metroid was praised for its captivating gameplay and stunning environment. The game evokes a profound sense of solitude through its combination of sprites, map design, enemies, and musical score that created an unmatched ambience that trapped the player in a feeling of loneliness. Game players praised its fast-paced gameplay, and Computer Entertainer praised the graphics as outstanding and the gameplay being full of surprises around every corner. Both Computer and Video Games and Computer Entertainer also complemented the ability to restart the game where they had last left off through Nintendo's new password system. No other NES Metroid game was released, and instead the next Metroid game would be developed for the Game Boy. Metroid 2: Return of Samus brought back many of the elements that made the original work, and added features of its own. The game controlled easier, giving Samus the ability to crouch and shoot, or even jump and shoot straight down, opening up new options for the player. Samus is tasked with taking out the Metroid Queen and eliminating the threat once and for all. Once the player defeats the Metroid Queen at the end of the game, Samus comes across something different: a newly hatched Metroid that mistakes the bounty hunter for its mother. Instead of destroying the Metroid, ensuring the species is wiped out, Samus spares the Metroid and brings it back with her, thus forming a bond between the two. Metroid 2 is often considered one of the weaker entries in the series, with its audio and visuals being a clear downgrade from the original. Samus had to be rendered so large on the screen in order for her to have any level of detail, and as a result the surrounding environment felt cramped as not much of the Game Boy's limited screen real estate was reserved to see around you. Despite the drawbacks, the Game Boy title reviewed generally favourably, with many praising its replay value and ambitious nature. When Super Metroid was released in 1994, it had already been 4 years since the console first came out. This means this was 4 years since Super Mario World and 3 years since A Link to the Past. Metroid 3 had a lot to live up to, given the lengthy development cycle, but thankfully it did just that. From the moment you boot up the game, it smacks you in the face with atmosphere. Dead scientists lay scattered across the floor, and the last Metroid sits in captivity inside glass tubing. The Metroid sits silently, taunting you. It's a haunting visual and paints a vivid narrative with just this image alone. And can we talk about how gorgeous this screen is? The colour palette is so pleasing, it's a work of art. The blues and blacks used to make up all the machinery, creating this dark ambience on the station. Greens lighting up the computer screens, the only other colours are the reds used on the Metroid, dead centre on the screen, demanding the viewer's attention. Then bright yellows and oranges for the title, Super Metroid, contrasting the cooler colours used across the rest of the screen. While developing the game, Yoshio Sakamoto envisioned the 3 games as a trilogy, with Super Metroid wrapping up the story. In a 1991 interview, when asked where the Metroid series will go, he responded, "I think the series is basically finished. Metroids were basically destined to be exterminated in the first place, so I wanted to finish it in the most beautiful form." Now, later on in the same interview, he does hint that it might not be the last game for Samus, It's just the end of the Metroid series. When asked what will Samus do next, he responds, "I can't clearly say right now, but I think I want to make her the main character in an action game." And he does later get to fulfill this desire by writing and directing for Metroid Other M for Wii. Of course, we did get more Metroid games, and the Metroid series didn't end after Super Metroid. We just got another trailer for Metroid Prime 4 after all. But it does seem that Super Metroid was originally planned to be the finale for the series. This is why the game takes place on Zebes, the same planet as the original Metroid. This time I wanted to complete the Metroid series. Also, I wanted to bring back an old enemy. A nemesis would be revived, and for the sake of portraying an image of the showdown with Samus, this time it could only happen on planet Zebes. This is what I thought. The battle between Samus and Mother Brain would come to an end. I wanted to show what happens at the end of Metroid. Super Metroid took everything the previous games did and refined it, creating a diverse array of locations and hidden secrets for the player to find. The game's story begins where the last games ended, with Samus delivering the baby Metroid to scientists so that they can hopefully discover how to use the creature's potential for the benefit of mankind. Just as Samus is leaving, however, her ship detects a distress signal sent by the scientists and returns to investigate. The opening moments of gameplay have you traverse the now empty research station, all inhabitants dead. You arrive to this dead end where the Metroid is sitting suspiciously in the center of the room, but as you approach, Ridley appears from the shadows. Ridley returns after his appearance in the original Metroid, a sadistic and bloodthirsty space pirate who today is solidly recognized as Samus's arch-enemy. Ridley had killed all the scientists on board and captured the Metroid. After a short battle with Samus, Ridley flees and then you, the player, are tasked with evacuating the ship before it self-destructs. The whole sequence is super iconic and sets up the story going forward. It is able to say so much without dialogue, something that many future games will follow suit with. After escaping, the player arrives at planet Zebes, and this is where the rest of the game will take place. You depart your ship and immediately you are provided with a decision. Do you go left or right? Traditionally, the player moves right through the game world, such as in Super Mario Bros., and left is backwards. Super Metroid blocks you from travelling right with a stone wall that you cannot pass through yet, meaning that you must travel left. This immediately establishes a non-linear structure to traversal, which is fundamental to the Metroid games. You progress left and are guided through a linear tunnel, surrounded by doors that you cannot open yet. You acquire your first upgrades at the bottom and, with nothing more to find, you must return through the tunnel you came through, as Hugo Billy points out in a blog post. To counter the tedium of retraversal, the tunnel is mostly vertical, and so presents different challenges when you try to get back up than it did when simply falling down. The retraversal is important because travelling the same route in different directions lets the player quickly set up a mental safe zone. This tunnel now feels perfectly safe, explored, and familiar. There is already a part of the world to call home, something that takes most Metroidvanias hours to achieve. This is the design philosophy that informs Metroid's level design, and many Metroidvanias that have followed since. You are guided through some part of the level with lots of branching pathways. Many of them cannot be accessed yet until you find an upgrade that unlocks them. This makes the player feel clever when they remember these areas later and then backtrack to explore them, being rewarded with optional power-ups. Super Metroid crafts this excellent atmosphere throughout your adventure, the music doing a lot to immerse you into feeling like you are Samus. Each area has a distinct soundtrack differentiating the area from others you explore. I want to mention the wrecked ship area though, as the music here departs from what you've heard before. The music more closely resembles ambient sounds as the game creates an empty, lonely atmosphere. Ghostly enemies pop up randomly near you as you explore. Many doors are inoperable as they are missing power, and the save point also refuses to work. In this area, the game nearly dips into horror territory, long before Hollow Knight did this with Deep Nest. As you explore the game, you will come across 4 major bosses, each corresponding to a part of this golden statue you will likely to find early on. Kraid is the first one, and, like Ridley, also returns from the first game. In the first game, he tricks the player by sending out a weak clone of himself before the actual boss fight begins, and they do the same thing here, with the weaker clone resembling Kraid from the first game. As you go into the actual boss battle though, you find out that Kraid is actually huge, large enough to take up most of the screen. This isn't even his final form though. As you battle him, just as you're getting the one-up on him, he breaks open the ceiling and reveals that he's far larger than anticipated, taking up multiple screens and showing off the Super Nintendo's power as a console. You take him down however and are rewarded with a power-up, and once you revisit the statue room you find that Kraid's statue was now grey. Clearly defeating him has changed something. The second major boss is Phantoon, the boss of the wrecked ship mentioned earlier. Fittingly, he phases in and out during the boss battle like a ghost, and once he's defeated, power is restored to the wrecked ship, completely changing the environment and making it far easier and safer to traverse. The third is Dragon, this weird draconic crustacean with a soft underbelly which you must aim at. She'll fly towards you and try to grab you, and a clever player may destroy a wall turret before allowing themselves to be grabbed, then grappling onto the sparking wreckage, quickly defeating Dragon. The fourth of these is Ridley, and once you two reunite, you must beat the hardest boss in the game up to this point. Ridley really is a challenge, but once taken down, he is defeated once and for all. And I mean that. While I was researching, I came across this line on Ridley's page on Wikitroid, and it's one of the funniest things I've ever read. Metroid Other M states that this defeat marks the first true death of Samus's arch-nemesis. Ridley had seemingly survived all of his previous battles, regardless of apparent occasions of disintegration. No wonder this guy is Samus's arch-enemy. You find that Ridley was hiding in an empty room with a shattered glass container, informing the player subtly that the Metroid has escaped. With the four defeated, the statue room now reveals the hidden entrance to Turian, the final area of the game. You make your way through, taking out Metroids on the way, before coming face to face with Mother Brain, the final boss of the first Metroid. As Sakamoto said, he wanted the battle between Samus and Mother Brain to come to an end, and it does here. You take her down, similar to the first game, before she suddenly grows a body and enters a second phase. After a while, Mother Brain will attack you with this unavoidable cone of multicolored energy, and the baby Metroid will fly in and attach itself to Mother Brain, draining her energy, before latching to you and restoring you to full health. You're now bestowed with the Hyper Beam, Samus's ultimate weapon. However, unfortunately, the Metroid Lava is killed here. After defeating Mother Brain, a countdown will begin, and you must return to your ship before the countdown ends. On your way to escape, if you like, you can make a detour to some animals that have been locked up, and you can release them. This is known as saving the animals, and may be familiar to you if you watch GDQ. At Games Done Quick, Super Metroid is traditionally the last speedrun that is ran, and a donation battle occurs over the duration of the event, in which viewers who donate can vote to either save or kill the animals. Whichever side raises the most money, the speedrunner must do. Once you return to your ship, you finish the game, and much like the NES original, you will receive a different ending depending on how quickly you beat the game. Having played through the game now, I can see exactly why it's so influential. For a 30-year-old game, it holds up remarkably well, hardly aging at all. There's only a couple of points that I felt the difficulty was a little too punishing, at least by modern sensibilities, and some parts of the world have one-way doors that if you go through unintentionally can force some very long and tedious backtracking to get back to where you were. Otherwise though, the game is incredibly fun and polished, clearly a classic no matter what way you look at it. A piece of gaming history to be sure. When Super Metroid released, it was met with extreme praise. Reviewers said that Super Metroid more than met the high expectations that were set for it. Nintendo Power mentioned that the game may well be the best action-adventure game ever, calling it the wave of the future, praising the sound, graphics, and controls. Superplay called it more of an experience than a game, likening it to watching a late-night movie due to the cinematic structure and atmospheric graphics and sounds. He noted that he found the game so compulsive that he was tempted to play without eating or sleeping. Super Metroid is often regarded as one of the greatest video games of all time. It has a legacy that has far outlived that of many other games of its same generation. Super Metroid helped to establish the Metroidvania genre, along with Symphony of the Night, and did a lot to define many of the mechanics that we associate with the genre. Typically 2D platforming, with a non-linear open map with progress locked behind finding upgrades. These features of Super Metroid went on to inspire countless other Metroidvanias out there. 2004's Cave Story may be one of the most important indie games of all time, released long before the indie explosion we benefit from today. Cave Story was a testament to what one person could accomplish, being developed entirely by Daisuke Amaya in his spare time. The game was inspired by the kind of games that Amaya would play in his youth, such as Metroid and Castlevania. It's somewhat funny then that what many consider the definitive indie game is a Metroidvania, which would then go on to inspire countless others. Metroid, of course, lives on through its sequels as it continues to reinvent itself, but through this Super Nintendo title of the 90s, Metroid will likely forever have a legacy through the Metroidvania genre. That will do it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. This was different than my usual form of doing videos, but the challenge was fun to be sure. Keep an eye out for the part 2 of this video on Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and until then, take care.